The waiting room of Dr. Hamilton's clinic was quiet that morning, filled with the faint hum of a television no one was watching and the sterile scent of disinfectant. Grace Whitmore sat near the window, her purse neatly folded on her lap, a book she hadn't opened resting beside her. The autumn light filtered through the blinds, soft and golden, painting gentle lines across her face. It was the kind of morning she usually liked, calm, predictable, safe, until her phone vibrated. The message came from her daughter, Olivia. Grace smiled faintly at the name, expecting something simple, maybe a photo from their last trip, or a check-in about her health. But as soon as she began reading, her breath caught. "Mom, don't be mad. We sold the River house. And Dad's old Rolex, too. We're leaving for the Caribbean tomorrow. Daniel says it's time to live a little." For a long moment, Grace simply stared at the screen, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something sane. Sold the River house. Her heart began to pound. That house wasn't just a property, it was the place Robert had built with his own hands after retirement. The place where they had spent summers planting roses by the dock, where he used to sip coffee at sunrise. And the Rolex. It wasn't a watch. It was the last thing he ever wore. She dialed Olivia immediately. No answer. Again. Straight to voicemail. "Olivia, what do you mean you sold the house? You can't sell what isn't yours," she whispered, her voice trembling, aware of the curious glance of a nurse nearby. Minutes later, another text arrived. "Relax, Mom. You signed the papers months ago. The power of attorney gave me full rights to handle your assets. You said you trusted me, remember? Don't worry. We'll send you some money if you need anything." Grace's fingers went cold. She remembered the day she'd signed that document at Olivia's request. "Just in case something happens to you, Mom. It'll make things easier." She had trusted her only child completely. Now, the same signature had stripped her of everything. The nurse called her name, but she couldn't move. It felt as though the floor had shifted beneath her. In her mind, she saw Robert's face, the way he used to smile whenever Olivia visited. How proud he was of the daughter they had raised. She thought of how he had said, half joking, "She got your heart, Gracie, but my stubbornness. Maybe too much of it." The doctor's door opened, but Grace quietly gathered her things and left instead. Outside, the wind off the Cedar River carried the first chill of fall. She walked slowly toward the parking lot, her phone heavy in her hand, her reflection trembling in the car window. For the first time in her life, she realized her daughter was capable of something she could never have imagined: betrayal. The afternoon light slanted weakly across the living room, washing the small apartment in shades of gray. Grace sat at her kitchen table, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her laptop. The cursor blinked on her bank's webpage, 3 accounts, all reading the same impossible number: $0. For a long moment she just stared, her chest tightening until she could barely breathe. It wasn't a mistake. She refreshed again and again, but the emptiness remained. The money Robert had saved, the pension, even her emergency fund, all gone. She called the bank, her voice trembling, trying to make sense of the transactions listed in neat digital lines. A woman on the other end explained politely that the withdrawals were authorized by the holder of her power of attorney, her daughter. Mrs. Gray handled all transfers personally. Everything is legal. The words cut sharper than any knife. Legal. That single word stripped her of outrage, of justice, of any claim to what had been her life's work. Grace ended the call in silence, her hands shaking as she closed the laptop. The apartment suddenly felt too small, the ticking wall clock too loud. She stood by the window, staring at the slow crawl of traffic below, her reflection faint against the glass. How could Olivia do this? She had given her every opportunity, every comfort. Robert used to joke that they'd spoiled her, but Grace had always believed love would be enough to raise gratitude. She was wrong. She sank onto the couch, the weight of 68 years pressing down on her. For a moment, she considered calling the police, but what could she say? Her daughter hadn't stolen anything by law, only by love. Tears welled, hot and silent. As dusk settled, she caught sight of the old oak dresser in her bedroom. It was Robert's voice, soft in her memory, that made her walk toward it. "If you ever need it, Gracie, it'll be there." She pulled open the top drawer, pushing past scarves and jewelry boxes until her fingers brushed a yellowed envelope tucked beneath an old photograph. Her heart skipped. She remembered the week before he passed. He'd given it to her with a weary smile. "Keep this safe, just in case." Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside were documents, a small set of keys, and a handwritten letter in Robert's bold, familiar script. "My dearest Grace, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. But don't be afraid. I planned for it." The first line blurred as tears filled her eyes. Somewhere between heartbreak and disbelief, a flicker of warmth stirred inside her chest. For the first time that day, she felt something other than despair, something almost like hope. Robert's letter revealed a side of him Grace had never truly seen. Precise, cautious, almost prophetic. In the letter, he explained that long before his illness, he had quietly built what he called Plan B. While everyone knew him as a modest regional bank manager, he had spent decades using his financial insight to prepare for exactly this kind of betrayal. He had purchased 3 commercial buildings across Cedar Falls, each rented to reputable local businesses, a pharmacy, a small law firm, and a design studio. He had also invested steadily in blue-chip stocks and municipal bonds, all registered under a holding company he founded in secret, Whitmore Holdings, LLC. Grace's heart pounded as she read that name again and again. Robert wrote that he had seen signs in Olivia and her husband, Daniel, their obsession with luxury, their growing impatience for inheritance. "I love our daughter," the letter said, "but I know her weaknesses. I trust your heart, Grace, but I cannot trust hers with your security. So I built a wall made of paper, not stone, invisible but strong." The letter explained how he structured everything legally, hidden behind layers of anonymity. The deeds were in the company's name, managed by an attorney Robert had trusted for years. He had even ensured that all rent payments were deposited into an account Grace could access using the enclosed key and instructions. But the line that froze her hand midair came near the end. "One of these buildings, my dear, is the place Olivia calls home. They pay rent every month to you." Grace felt the blood rush to her ears. "Olivia lives in my building?" The same daughter who had stripped her accounts clean, living comfortably in an apartment funded by her mother's unseen generosity? Robert's reasoning was clear. If greed ever blinds her, the truth will humble her. I wanted to give her the chance to learn, not through sermons, but through consequences. For several minutes, Grace sat motionless, absorbing each sentence as though her late husband were speaking beside her. The betrayal still burned, but beneath it stirred something steadier, gratitude, awe, and a spark of resolve. Robert had not just left her protection, he had left her power. She folded the letter carefully, slipped the keys back into the envelope, and whispered into the dim room, "You always were the wiser one, Robert." As the city lights flickered on outside, Grace no longer felt like a victim left behind. She had the means, the truth, and now a purpose. The quiet determination in her eyes was something Olivia had never seen before. The law office smelled faintly of old wood and leather, an air of quiet authority that made Grace feel both nervous and safe. Henry Callahan, the attorney Robert had once trusted, sat across from her, glasses perched low on his nose as he read through the documents she'd brought. Sunlight slanted across the rows of framed certificates behind him, glinting off a bronze plaque that read integrity above all. Grace sat perfectly still, her hands folded over her purse. The envelope with Robert's letter and the keys lay open on the desk between them. Henry turned a page, exhaled, and looked up. He really did plan everything, he said softly. These properties, the LLC, your husband made sure you'd never be left unprotected. Grace nodded, her voice calm but distant. Can we make it official again? In my name. Henry adjusted his glasses. Yes, Mrs. Whitmore. I'll reassign the deeds under your individual ownership. The accounts too. But he hesitated, leaning back. You should understand what that means. Your daughter and her husband are living in one of your buildings. If we make this public right now, they'll know immediately. You could file for eviction, but it will be messy, family against family. Are you ready for that? Grace stared at the documents, so many pages, each a quiet fortress Robert had built for her. Not yet, she said finally. I don't want revenge. I just want the truth to stay on my side. Henry smiled, faintly understanding. Then here's my advice. Let them believe you have nothing. Don't say a word. Sign the transfer quietly. Redirect the rent payments to a new account and wait. They'll show their hand soon enough. And when they do, you'll have every legal right to act. She felt an unfamiliar steadiness in her chest, a calm that came not from forgiveness, but from control. For the first time since Robert's death, she wasn't reacting to life, she was directing it. As she signed each document, the scratch of her pen filled the office. Henry gathered the papers, sealing them in a folder stamped confidential. When she rose to leave, he walked her to the door. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, pausing, your husband would have been proud of how you're handling this. Grace's lips curved in a faint, tired smile. He taught me to think before I fight. Outside, the late afternoon sun spilled across the quiet street, touching the tops of the maple trees. She tightened her coat, feeling the envelope in her bag, a reminder of Robert's faith, and now of her own resolve. The war wasn't over, but the battlefield had shifted to her ground. The knock on the door came just as the afternoon light began to fade. Grace had been expecting it. She placed her teacup down, steadying her breath before opening the door. Olivia stood in the hallway, her face flushed, eyes wide with anger, and behind her, Daniel loomed, jaw tight, clutching a crumpled letter. Mom! Olivia started sharply, waving the paper. What is this supposed to mean? An eviction notice? From Whitmore Holdings. That's where we live. Grace regarded her daughter quietly for a moment, then opened the door wider. Come in. They entered the small apartment that had replaced the elegant river house Olivia had sold. The contrast wasn't lost on any of them. Daniel threw the letter on the coffee table. This has gone too far, Grace. Whoever's behind this, your lawyer, that Henry guy, they're making a huge mistake. You can't just throw your own daughter out on the street. Grace took her seat, her hands calm in her lap. No mistake was made, she said softly. The notice is legitimate. Olivia blinked, confusion and irritation colliding. Legitimate? You don't even know how real estate works, Mom. You're not. She stopped mid-sentence, the realization dawning like a slow dawn. Wait, are you saying you own the building? Grace met her eyes. Yes, your father bought it years ago. It's part of Whitmore Holdings. I finalized the transfer last week. Olivia's mouth fell open, color draining from her face. Daniel swore under his breath. You're joking. You let us move in there, knowing you were our landlord. No, grace corrected quietly. I didn't let you. Robert did. He believed one day the truth would teach you something. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that fills every corner of a room and makes even breathing sound loud. Olivia took a step closer, her voice trembling. Mom, you can't do this to us. We have nowhere else to go. We thought you forgave us. Grace looked at her daughter, not with anger, but with a kind of tired sadness that went deeper. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened, she said. You sold the home your father built. You emptied my accounts. You treated trust like a credit card with no limit. And now you're shocked there's a bill. Daniel slammed his hand against the back of a chair, but Grace didn't flinch. She stood, straightening her cardigan. Her voice steady and final. You have 30 days. Use them wisely. Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but Grace only opened the door, gesturing toward the hall. Actions have consequences, Olivia. Always. When the door closed behind them, Grace exhaled slowly. Her heart ached, but her hands no longer trembled. Outside, the sun dipped behind the rooftops, and the quiet felt heavier, but it was hers. The next day, the phone rang before sunrise. Grace hesitated before answering, already knowing who it was. Olivia's voice came through the line, tired, strained, trembling at the edges. Mom, please, can we talk? Just one more time. By afternoon, they were back in her apartment. The autumn light was dim, filtered through gauzy curtains, catching on the dust that hung in the air. Olivia sat forward, elbows on her knees, while Daniel stood near the window, arms crossed tightly. The tension between them pulsed like a heartbeat. Mom, I made mistakes, Olivia began, her voice breaking. We both did, but you don't understand. We thought you didn't need the house anymore. You said you wanted a simpler life. Daniel said we could invest the money, make something out of it. We didn't mean to hurt you. Grace looked at her daughter, searching her face for sincerity. And emptying my accounts? Selling your father's watch? Was that an investment too? Olivia winced, eyes wet. I just wanted freedom. I didn't think. No, Grace interrupted quietly. You didn't. Daniel turned sharply. Look, this isn't helping anyone. You've made your point. We'll move, fine. But you can't ruin our reputation with this eviction. It'll follow us forever. Grace rose from her chair, slow and deliberate. Reputation is earned, Daniel. So is forgiveness. Olivia stood, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Please, Mom. I know I've been selfish, but I can fix this. Just give us another chance. For a moment, Grace's resolve wavered. She saw not the woman standing before her, but the little girl who used to braid her hair and fall asleep in her lap during storms. That image tugged at her heart until it almost broke her. Almost. I'm giving you 30 days, she said, voice trembling but steady. If you haven't left by then, I'll have no choice but to take it to court. I won't let your choices destroy what your father built. Olivia stared at her mother, disbelief flooding her face, but Grace turned away, unwilling to let her see the tears already forming. When they finally left, the apartment fell silent again. Grace sank onto the couch, staring at the framed photograph on the mantel, Robert smiling in his old fishing hat, the river glinting behind him. Her vision blurred as tears slid down her cheeks. She wasn't proud. She wasn't vindicated. She was simply empty. Outside, the wind rattled the window pane, carrying the faint sound of leaves against the glass, soft, steady, like a heart refusing to stop beating. The cottage by the Cedar River stood quiet beneath a pale morning sky, its white paint dulled by years of neglect. Grace paused at the gate, her fingers brushing against the rusted latch. For a moment, she just stood there, listening to the faint rush of the river beyond the trees. The last time she'd walked through this gate, she had still been a wife, a mother, a woman certain of her family's love. Now she returned as someone else, someone both broken and rebuilt. The front door creaked as she stepped inside. Dust swirled in the air, catching light through cracked windows. Everything was as she remembered, and yet hollow. Robert's books still lined the shelves. A chipped mug rested where he used to set it by the sink. Grace traced her hand over the worn table, remembering the mornings when he'd sit there reading the paper, humming off-key. In the bedroom, she found a small wooden box, tucked beneath a folded quilt. Her breath caught as she recognized Robert's handwriting on an envelope inside. For when you find your way back. She sat on the edge of the bed, the same place where she'd once cried herself to sleep after his passing, and carefully opened it. Gracie, if you're reading this, then you've survived the storm. I knew you would. I built this house for you, not as a refuge from the world, but as proof that love leaves foundations stronger than loss. If you're angry, I understand, but don't let anger build walls where love once planted gardens. Let it guide you back to life. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Robert had always known her heart better than anyone. He had seen this moment coming, the moment when pain would tempt her to harden completely. Grace walked outside to the deck overlooking the river. The sun had begun to set, painting the water gold. The air smelled of pine and silt and memory. She stood there for a long time, the letter trembling in her hands. All her life, she had thought of forgiveness as surrender. But now, standing in the quiet Robert had once loved, she realized it was something else entirely, a choice to move forward, not backward. She folded the letter, pressing it close to her chest, and whispered into the wind, "You're right, Robert. Love is the only thing worth keeping." The river shimmered as if it had heard her, and for the first time in years, Grace smiled a fragile, steady thing that felt almost like peace. The late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds of Henry Callahan's office, striping the mahogany desk in warm light. Grace sat across from him, her demeanor calm, composed, almost serene. Weeks had passed since the confrontation, and though her heart still carried the bruises of betrayal, her mind was clear. The time for punishment had come and gone. What remained now was choice. Henry flipped through a stack of documents, his tone practical. Legally, you're within your rights to proceed with eviction. I can file the case today if you wish. Grace shook her head gently. No, Henry, I don't want to drag this through court. I don't need to humiliate them. I just need them to understand. Henry raised an eyebrow. Understand what? Exactly. That love isn't a license, she said softly. It's a responsibility. He leaned back in his chair, intrigued. What do you have in mind? Grace opened her notebook, her neat handwriting filling the page, every word deliberate. I want to give them a chance to start over, but on my terms. Daniel needs to find real work, something that doesn't rely on my husband's savings. And Olivia, she hesitated, her voice tightening just slightly. She'll volunteer at Maplewood Senior Home. They're always short-staffed. Let her see what real giving looks like. Henry studied her for a moment before nodding. A moral agreement, not a legal one. Exactly, Grace replied. If they accept, I'll let them stay in the apartment temporarily. If not, I'll proceed as planned. Henry smiled faintly, admiration flickering in his expression. You know, Grace, most people in your position would want revenge. I did, she admitted, for a while. But revenge doesn't rebuild anything. It only burns what's left. Henry closed the folder. Then I'll draft your terms. You'll have them by morning. As Grace rose to leave, the fading sunlight caught in her silver hair, giving her the quiet glow of someone who had walked through fire and learned how to carry light instead of ash. Outside, the cool air of early evening wrapped around her like a sigh. She paused at the crosswalk, watching people hurry past. Young couples, workers, nurses on their way home. Life moved forward, indifferent yet forgiving. She smiled faintly, whispering to herself, "Let it begin again." And with that, she crossed the street, steady, unhurried, her steps leading not toward the past she had lost, but toward the peace she was ready to build. The scent of antiseptic and lavender hung gently in the halls of Maplewood Senior Home. Olivia moved quietly from room to room, her hair tied back, her once manicured hands now covered in soft gloves. At first, she had dreaded this place, The slow shuffle of walkers, the hum of oxygen machines, the endless repetition of names and stories that slipped away moments later. But over time, the rhythm of the place began to change her. Daniel hadn't stayed. Within a week of Grace's proposal, he'd packed his bags, muttering something about humiliation and starting fresh. Olivia didn't follow, for the first time in years. She didn't chase after a man to keep her world from falling apart. She simply stood in the silence he left behind and realized it wasn't the end. It was the start. Her first patient was a retired teacher named Mr. Orlando, who often mistook her for his daughter. The first time he called her sweetheart, Olivia almost corrected him but stopped. She let him talk, let him tell his story for the 5th, 10th, 20th time. Each word softened something inside her, the part that had grown hardened by greed and shame. The work was exhausting. She cleaned trays, lifted wheelchairs, read bedtime stories to patients who wouldn't remember her name by morning. Yet every night she went home to her small apartment, the one Grace had arranged for her through Henry, and she slept soundly for the first time in years. Weeks turned into months. The staff at Maplewood began to notice how patients responded to her. She had a gift, a gentle patience that made even the most confused residents feel safe. One afternoon, as she helped Mr. Orlando trace his trembling hand over an old photograph, he looked up at her with sudden clarity and said, "You're a good girl." It was such a simple sentence, yet it broke something open inside her. At the end of her shift, the head nurse stopped her in the hallway. "Olivia, I just wanted to say, you've been wonderful here. The residents light up when they see you. I think you've found your place." Later that evening, Grace sat by her kitchen window, sipping tea when her phone buzzed. A text from Henry. "Thought you'd like to know. Your daughter's becoming Maplewood's favorite volunteer." Grace stared at the message for a long moment. Outside, the last light of sunset glowed against the Cedar River. She smiled, softly, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't pride, exactly, nor forgiveness. It was something quieter, deeper. Peace. And as the river shimmered beneath the fading sky, Grace whispered to herself, "She's finding her way home." A year had passed since the storm had quieted, though its lessons still lingered. The river cottage had been restored, fresh paint, new roses by the deck, laughter echoing where silence once lived. On an early spring morning, Olivia arrived holding a small, weathered box she had found while sorting through Robert's old study materials. Inside, folded with the same care he gave every ledger and letter, was an envelope addressed simply, "For both of you." Grace and Olivia sat together at the table overlooking the water, the same table where Robert had once read the newspaper, his coffee steaming in the morning light. Grace opened the envelope, her hand steady now. Robert's handwriting was bold, deliberate, unmistakably his. "My dear Grace, my stubborn Olivia, if you're reading this, it means time has done what I hoped, healed what pride once broke. I built this house to hold love, not memories of loss. So don't just live in it. Build something new from it. Build together." Below his signature, another line read, "The land next door is still ours. You'll know what to do." Tears blurred Olivia's eyes. "He always believed we'd find our way back," she whispered. And they did, over the following months. Grace and Olivia poured their savings, their labor, and their forgiveness into that adjacent plot. Where weeds once grew, they laid down paths. Where neglect had crept in, they planted life. The sign that would one day hang above the entrance read Whitmore Haven, a small community center for senior support and therapy, named not for wealth or lineage, but for renewal. Grace watched Olivia work beside her, sleeves rolled up, laughing with the volunteers, hair blown by the same river breeze that had once carried her away. Each nail she hammered, each garden bed she planted, stitched something invisible back together. One afternoon, as they packed up after a long day, a familiar voice called from behind them. Daniel stood by the fence, older, humbled, holding a small box. "This belonged to Robert," he said quietly, opening it to reveal the silver watch, the one Olivia had sold long ago. "I bought it back. It should be here." Grace accepted it with a nod, no words needed. Later that evening, as twilight shimmered on the water, she slipped the watch onto her wrist. Its tick was soft, steady, alive again. Standing beside her daughter, she looked out across the river and whispered, almost to herself, "True wealth isn't what we keep, but what we choose to rebuild together." And as the last light glowed over Whitmore Haven, the river carried their silence, not of regret, but of peace.